fans, and welcome back to another episode here of the Steam Whistle. This is going to be a very exciting episode as I have a very special guest. First, I want to thank everybody for supporting what I do here on Ramble and, of course, supporting the Yellow Jackets. Yesterday was a great look for our fan base as the Auburn baseball game happened, and we had over 4,000 people at Rush Chandler Stadium. It was a great look, especially on national television. And so that was obviously a very great moment for just Tech Athletics this week. And then, of course, me personally, I thanked you all for the support. But without further ado, let me introduce today's guest. He played quarterback for the Yellow Jackets varsity from 1968 to 70, and he attended Georgia Tech from 1967 and graduated in 1971 with a degree in behavioral management. He earned 3 letters as quarterback and was named captain for the Georgia Tech football team, scored the game-winning touchdown in Georgia Tech's 6-0 upset win over rival Georgia in 1969, and in his senior season, he split quarterback duties with Eddie McShann and was part of the 1970 Georgia Tech squad who won 9 games, including a Sun Bowl victory. After graduation, he has continued to be just a great Tech man. He spent 7 years as a Division I coach. He later served as the president of Georgia Tech's National Letter Winners Club. And since 1991, he has been spearheading the Ideals Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization which helps work with high school student athletes to help them develop their leadership and personal life skills. This is Jack Williams. Thank you for coming on, Jack.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be with you.
So, Jack, you're from Atlanta. I was born and raised in Atlanta. You're from Atlanta, but growing up, Atlanta must have been very different. This is pre-pro sports, and Tech was the only game in town. But what was Atlanta like? And what was your childhood like in the city of Atlanta?
Decatur was a small town at that point in time. Hold on, I'm getting rid of my dog here. It was a small town, and it was a great place to grow up. We were, within 15 minutes of downtown of Atlanta, and I grew up a Georgia Tech fan, went to games since I was probably 6 years old, and just enjoyed my time in Decatur.
When did you start playing sports? Now, I've heard a little birdie told me, you may know who this is, but a little birdie told me that a former Georgia Tech quarterback was once your Little League coach.
That's right. Jim Southard was my Little League coach, and knew him very well as his son John, who you had on the show. But started playing there in I guess when I was 6 years old in Little League, played baseball through my sophomore year in high school, and then I started playing football in what they called Gray Y, which would be youth ball now, but it was elementary schools in the 6th and 7th grade, and played basketball as well. Played 4 years in basketball in high school and 3 years on the varsity in football. Played 2 years of baseball before focusing on football and basketball.
Well, for playing football, Decatur High School, for people who don't know, they have a long line in terms of just Tech people who have gone on from Decatur to go to Georgia Tech. I think the most notable one is Frank Broyles. You came from there. There's several others. What was it like playing high school football at the time? Georgia is known as, there's obviously Texas is the Mac-a-Daddy of high school football in America, but Georgia is a very strong state for high school football. What was it like at the time? And then also, when did you start to really get recruited by schools and coaches?
Well, it was great playing. We played in the DeKalb County League at that time, which was a very, very strong league in Georgia. Avondale was in it, which was a traditional state contender. I was fortunate that my head coach, Franklin Brooks, was a All-American at Georgia Tech, an offensive lineman.
I should have known that.
Really helped me in terms of the Tech connection. I was not heavily recruited at all, and I wanted to go to Georgia Tech. If they were dumb enough to offer me, I was going to accept. but there was only one other school that was really showed a significant interest in me. And when Tech offered, I immediately accepted. I thought I was going to be playing a defensive back. In fact, the game that I got my offer on, I intercepted 3 passes, and so I kind of thought that's what I would do at Tech. But I worked on both defensive back and quarterback, prior to going there.
Who offered you? Because this is your freshman year was 1967. Was Bobby Dodd the one who offered you, or was it an assistant, or who?
It was an assistant, and I'm embarrassed to say I'm drawing a blank on his name. Coach Dodd was coaching. I was part of Coach Dodd's last recruiting class, and I got to know Coach Dodd when I was playing there and coaching there. And I used to get him. I said, "Is there any truth to the rumor that as soon as you signed me to a scholarship, you realized you needed to retire?" And we got a kick out of that. But I'm drawing a blank on the gentleman that was the running back coach, Woodruff. Lou Woodruff was the gentleman that actually offered me the scholarship.
Now, Bobby Dodd was what hasn't been said about him, but just a class individual. But for people, he was like a lot of people who grew up in the 50s and early 60s. I mean, he was such a staple of college football, and particularly in Atlanta and of Georgia Tech. And so when he stepped down, I think February of 1967, that was a big shock because it was very sudden. And in comes Bud Carson. When you heard about the news, what was your reaction? Did it come as a surprise? Was it expected? For a lot of people that I've talked with said it was a surprise.
Well, it was a total surprise. Quite frankly, I think the 2 previous classes had been not super strong recruiting classes. Back then, we were out of the conference, and and that's one of the reasons we got out is Coach Todd wanted unlimited scholarships and wanted kids to be able to, graduate however long it took. And so my freshman year, we signed, I think it was 53 people got scholarships. I was probably number 53, but so it was a really large class, and because of the 2 previous classes not being as strong, a lot of our guys started playing as sophomores. Freshmen weren't eligible then. We had a really good freshman team. So I think it was a major shock to most people, but I also think Coach Dodd thought that there might be a couple lean years coming, and it was probably a good time to step away.
The lineage of, first I want to ask you about freshman year. Who was the freshman coach? And of course, back then, their freshman team played, about 4 or 5 games, maybe a little more. And then there's the big Thanksgiving game, the Scottish Rite Football Classic, where the Governor's Cup was originally handed out, and that was, of course, for the Bull Pups and the Baby Jackets playing. What was the experience playing on the freshman team? Because you get a lot. I'm guessing because you're a freshman. Of course, there were 53 of you, so maybe I'm wrong, but I'm guessing you're getting used to college life as well as college football, and also I'm guessing it's a freshman team. You're getting a decent amount of playing time and learning the ropes.
Well, it was great. I think it took some pressure off of you that you weren't trying to compete to play on the varsity like they do now. We had a great freshman coach that was perfect for that transition, named Bill Fulcher, who later was head coach following Blake Carson, who I actually coached with, both of those folks. But Coach Fulcher was just the perfect guy for a freshman class, and we had former senior athletes that had finished up the year before for Coach Dodd as our student assistants, and they were some of the best players on Coach Dodd's Orange Bowl team. So we had a former pro defensive back, Bobby Franklin was the other paid coach. So we had a great staff, and I think we went 5-1. I know we got beat by Miami. We beat Georgia 14-7, and there were 44,000 people at that Thanksgiving game that you alluded to earlier. So that was kind of the introduction to what I thought big-time college football, being there with 44,000. We also played at Tennessee in Neyland Stadium and won up there. So it was a great experience. And one of the things, just from a personal standpoint, that was the only time at Georgia Tech that we got to wear the gold pants, which is what Georgia Tech wore for years and years and years. And when Coach Carson came, he changed the uniforms, and we never got to wear them again.
Well,
but, we got to wear them that year.
Well, yeah, and it's nice that you alluded to that, because some people know this if a familiar listener. I am a uniform junkie. And so, it was kind of a turbulent time as well, just in terms of Georgia Tech football, because Dodd steps down, Bud Carson comes in, and while you were playing on the freshman team, it was a difficult 67 season for him as they started 3-0, and then Kim King got hurt, and then the wheels fell off afterward. They gave Georgia a decent fight, but they finished 4-6, which was their first losing season for Tech since 1950. They wore the Dodd era uniforms for 1 year. They also debuted the GT on the helmet that year, in 67. Although I think the freshman team, you guys, I think wore the white shells that
we did.
That the Kim King and Lenny Snow had worn and up to the end of 66. And then in 68 they debuted the gold jerseys with and it was a very dark gold, like a mustardy gold, and so it was a new look, and then a relatively new coach, and it's always hard to be the guy who follows the guy. I mean, for any legendary coach, the successor, that's a very tough position, and so Bud Carson had a lot of pressure on him. So your second year, your sophomore year, your first year at the varsity level, 1968. What was Bud Carson like as a coach? I've heard he was a little more disciplinarian. Not that Dodd wasn't a disciplinarian, but Dodd was people called Dodd like a sugar mouth kind of guy. He was a lot more easygoing. I've heard that Bud Carson was like a Herb Brooks kind of coach. What was he like?
He was not easygoing. I'll put it that way. He was a hard-nosed man, and he was a defensive coach, obviously. And, Coach Carson was an exceptional defensive coach, and later proved that by, being part of the 4 Super Bowls with the Pittsburgh Steelers, being their defensive coach. But he wasn't really made out to be a head coach. He didn't have that personality and that persona. And I think he was a little bit too hands-on, but he had some really good assistants that were brought in, over the 3 years that I were there, several of which became head coaches. But he was a demanding coach, and we didn't have any continuity on offense. We had a different coordinator all 3 years that I was there. On defense, we had pretty much the same staff, and we always had a really good defense. But we were, I would say we were average on offense because we never really had that continuity. But he ended up being a great defensive coach, and I ended up speaking at his funeral and was a pallbearer at his funeral as well.
Well, in 68, your first year there, the lineage of the starting quarterback at Tech since the 60s, it was Lothridge, Jerry Priestley, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, Kim King, Priestley, all right. Then it was Kim King, and then it was, I believe, Larry Good. And I think Larry Good was the starter your sophomore year, right?
Correct.
And they, again, a good start. You started 4-2 and then lost 4 straight to end the year. They did beat Auburn, though, for the first time in a couple of years. I think a 1-point win as well.
Yeah, Larry, I never played the first 4 games of any year, all for different reasons. And Larry Good was the starter, and Larry was a really good player. And we had a gentleman by the name of Ken Bonifay was the backup, and Al was the number 3 quarterback. And they told me that they wanted a red shirt, maybe what they called a white red shirt, that I would stay on the varsity and travel, but that if I I didn't play in the first 4 to 5 games, they would redshirt me and still travel. But so I said, fine. So the 5th game, I get called into Coach Carson's office, and he said, we're going to, we decided to redshirt you. Everything will stay the same, but we're not going to play you. And that game, Larry got hurt, and Ken Bonifay went in. It was homecoming against Tulane. We always played Tulane, and it was homecoming, and Ken did a really good job, I thought, but we got behind at the very end of the game, and it was like 1 minute and 10 seconds, and Coach Carson signals for me to go in and run the 2-minute offense. And I'm thinking, Coach, you just told me I'm going to be redshirted. And I said, Ken's been doing a pretty good job. And he said, well, you run the 2-minute offense better than he does. And I'm thinking, well, it's all been in practice. So I go in, and I don't know who was more surprised, my team in the huddle or the other team. But as luck would have it, I go 8 for 8 and throw the touchdown, and we win the game. And I think Coach Carson got a lot of grief for that about, where is this guy been? Well, it was a fluke thing, that would have never happened again. But we won a couple more games. We didn't lose 4 in a row, I don't believe, because I know we won a couple more. But we got trounced really bad by Georgia when they won the SEC. I never started that game. And then the next year, Charles Dudish had been recruited a year behind me from Avondale, and Charles and I were the same grade, but his dad held him back in the 8th grade, and so he was 1 year behind me in high school, and I was really shocked that he signed to go to Tech, but he was kind of like the darling of the media and a great athlete, really good athlete.
I've heard there was was he the one who was like the number 1 signing? There was like some highly touted quarterback that people told me about.
Yeah, he was a national. He'd have been considered a 5-star. He was better as a baseball player than he was as a football player. He should have gone right to the pros and played baseball, and he would have had a great future. And he ended up later trying it, but he hurt his wrist and never made it. But I had beaten out Charles during spring practice, and I'd beaten him out in the fall and was going to start. And we had a scrimmage, the last scrimmage before the first game, and I was supposed to play 1 quarter. And on the last play of that quarter, I got my shoulder separated. And so I missed the first 4 games again. And Charles started stumbling and ended up having some personal issues and left the team. And then I ended up playing the rest of the year. And that was the year that we beat Georgia after having not beaten them, I guess, for a number of years. I can't remember, 6 years.
I think it was 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
I will correct you. I don't want to be that guy, but I have the 68 season up here. The Tulane game, you did, I see I have a newspaper archive website from me. It says Williams Sparks Tech over Green. He's 23-19. But then after that, they had Duke, Navy, Notre Dame, Georgia, and they did lose 4 straight to end the year. Which, again, Notre Dame and Georgia were 2 top 10 teams. I'm not blaming them or anything. They'd been better than anyone like me would have done. I'm unathletic as heck. The next year, 1969, is interesting because that was the first year that you really got the majority of the snaps under center. And also, when I look at this, it is the schedule from hell. Holy smokes. When I see this, it says SMU and Baylor, who weren't like, perennial powers at that time, but 2 power conference opponents, then Clemson, then at number 10, Tennessee, 15th ranked Auburn at home, then you go west and you play number 7 USC, Duke at home, at Tulane, number 9 Notre Dame at home, and then Georgia. That is a tremendously difficult schedule.
Yeah, we were independent at that time, so we played. In other years we had Florida State and South Carolina and some of those schools in there, Miami. So we played sometimes we played a tougher SEC schedule than some of the other SEC schools. But again, we had a lot of guys playing as sophomores and as juniors who didn't have very many seniors playing, and so I think we finished 4 and 6 if I remember correctly, something like that.
Yep.
But then we did beat Georgia. Georgia wasn't. They weren't anything like they were the year before when they won the SEC championship. But they were a decent team, and we had a great defense, and we had a gentleman by the name of Bubba Holtz, and I believe Bubba intercepted 3 passes that game, if I remember correctly.
That was also, 69 was also the year that Rock Perdoni really came along. He wasn't, I think he was an All-American the year after, but he really had a great year.
Yeah, Rock that was his first year there, and was a defensive tackle All-American. But our defense played exceedingly well against Georgia, and offense, we just did enough to win. I tell people that game was so boring. If I hadn't been playing in it, I'd have probably left early. But our defense kept us in the game, and I get credit for the winning touchdown, but it was like a 1-yard quarterback sneak with about a 3-foot hole to run through, so anybody could have done it. But it was important for Tech because we finally beat Georgia, and then we were able to beat them again the following year. And the following year, the Georgia game meant more to me than the first one did because we beat them in Athens, and I had probably my best game. But winning 6-0 and breaking that drought was really kind of memorable for Tech folks.
It was in front of 60,000 people, and a bittersweet moment. I just talked about Rock Perdoni. His father died of a heart attack in the stands after the win, and that's just. For him, that must have been. You've just won a thrilling game, and then to have something that tragic happen. Did the team rally around him? I'm guessing. Y'all must have been. It's a team. Not everyone necessarily is the best of friends, but y'all must have rallied around him afterward, I'm sure.
Yeah, nobody knew, including him, during the game, and he actually passed away after the game in the hospital, but he had the heart attack in the game, and I believe it was the first college game he ever seen Rock play, and so that was a tough time, and Rock and I were not that close in college. We kind of ran with different circles, but because of a tragedy with another teammate, he and I have become best of friends. In fact, I just spoke to him yesterday. He had an accident off of his truck trying to cut some limbs and broke some ribs and really had a rough time of it. But Rock was an incredible football player and just a great guy.
That win is the last time Georgia Tech has shut out Georgia, 6-0. Now, I see the 6-0 score, and you scored the touchdown. Was the extra point blocked, or did y'all go for 2 and not get it?
I can't remember, and don't care, to be honest with you. It didn't make any difference.
Yep.
It sure could have. I don't remember what happened to it.
So the 69, 4 and 6, and now, pressure was on Coach Carson. Of course, beating Georgia took a decent amount off because anytime you beat Georgia, everyone's going to be happy. But 3 straight 4 and 6 years. This is 1970, year 4 for Carson. There had been a guy named Eddie McShann who was quarterback for the freshman team in 69, and the only reason I'm acting like this is a big deal, I'm guessing it was a decent deal at the time, at least for the public and the press. He was the first African-American player to play football at Georgia Tech, and he was also a quarterback, which is the most visible visible public position on the field. Did you hear anything about, I'm sure inside it wasn't a big deal because Tech had been integrated for 8 years and they had done so peacefully back in 1961. But, for the first African-American player, did you hear any noise about this? What was that like, just the transition?
Well, technically, he was the first scholarship African-American player. A gentleman by the name of Carl Barnes actually was on the team the year before. He was just not on scholarship. Great guy, by the way. Eddie, it was a much bigger thing with the media than it was with us as a team. Atlanta being a social mecca, from a race relations standpoint, the media really made a big to-do about it. And Eddie was just an exceptional athlete. He was far better than I was. He was really good, very quiet. And, I can't imagine, what it was like for him going through that scenario with all that pressure. It later did end up being a factor for him. But Eddie started the first 4 games and should have. In the 4th game, he struggled, and Coach Carson put me in, and we scored 28 points in the second half when I went in, and not due to me. We had a running back named Brent Cunningham who rushed for 200 yards that game on the option, and we kept running the option, and Clemson was dumb enough to make me pitch it instead of letting me run, and Brent ran all over him. But then I played the rest of the year except for the Notre Dame game, and did not start that game for some questionable reasons, and then finished starting the Georgia game and the Sun Bowl. So
you say questionable reasons. What do you mean by that? And now that Notre Dame game, Tech had started the year 4-0 and climbed the polls all the way to number 13. They lost 2 games to 2 good teams in Tennessee and Auburn. Then they win 3 straight. And it was actually the Notre Dame loss that put Tech back into the polls because Notre Dame was number 1 and Tech took them to the wire, and so that actually turn some heads more. I mean, obviously a win would have turned heads sideways, but that made people respect Tech. But you say questionable reasons.
Well, they're questionable in that Eddie and I were totally different type quarterbacks, obviously, and I did have some experience behind me. And once I went in, we got beat by Auburn, I believe. But we played really well, and I played well. And then the year before, in '69, I had the worst game of my life against Notre Dame on national television. I threw 3 interceptions, and that was right before the 6-0 game. But so that I had some vengeance in my mind about playing Notre Dame again, and I had tweaked a groin at the Monday practice, and I missed 1 day of practice, and then practiced the rest of the time, and then Eddie started the game, and did well. We didn't do much on offense, but we ended up getting beat 10-7. We were leading 7-3, and then they hit a long pass right in the 4th quarter on us, and we got beat 10-7. But I never was told why I didn't play, and there was an article leading up to the Georgia game in the paper by Furman Bisher about why I didn't play against Notre Dame, and he had called my dad, and the rumor was I was sick, and he just called my dad and asked whether I was sick, and my dad said, I don't know why he didn't play, but he wasn't sick. And Coach Carson did not appreciate my dad making that statement. I didn't know, Dad didn't call me. I didn't know any of that happened. And so the first day back at practice, we had a couple off days before we played Georgia. Coach Carson was late to practice, which was unheard of. And finally, after practice, he pulled me aside, and I still didn't know what had happened. And he said, I don't appreciate what your dad did. And I said, well, tell me about it. I don't know what it was. And he told me, and I said, well, Coach, that's what he said was true. I wasn't sick. I said, you never did tell me why I didn't play. I said, I've been doing pretty well up till then. And the team was rallying behind me, and you didn't tell me. And he gave me one reason, about my leg and all this, that, and the other. And I said, well, Coach, I practiced the rest of the week, but, I think it'd been nice if you told me. And so as I left the field, got in the dressing room, Tom Moore, who was our offensive coordinator, who was a great coach, who was later Peyton Manning's coach.
Oh, yeah, he just retired. Like, Tom Moore had goodness.
50-something years in the
Yeah.
pros. But Tom came up to me, and he said, Coach Carson's really upset. I said, yeah, he talked to me, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, Coach, you never did tell me why I didn't play in that Notre Dame game. And I didn't tell him what Coach Carson said. And Tom gave me a whole other reason. And I said, well, Coach, I said, you and Coach Carson ought to at least get your story the same, because that's not what he told me. And I just laughed and walked off. And then I started the Georgia game and threw 2 touchdowns, and we won handsomely over there. So it was kind of an interesting senior year, but we did have a chance to go to the Sun Bowl and beat a really good Texas Tech team in the Sun Bowl.
That Georgia game, 17-7, again, you said that, and you threw 2 touchdowns. Wasn't one of them to Steve Harkey? I think one of them was. I may be wrong.
No, one was to Mike Wasson, and one was to
Wasson, that's
Larry
who it was.
Stutter.
And 17-7 win. The defense did great, holding Georgia to only 7 points, and it's really marked to beat them 2 in a row, to beat them in their place, and then to go 8-3 in the regular season. That really sort of put the stamp that, at least for 1970, Tech has returned to winning football. And then you played a really good Texas Tech team in the Sun Bowl, and that was a relatively odd game because Texas Tech, then they had trouble with field goals, and then the defense was able to make some clutch plays.
Yeah, they had a really good running back, a couple good running backs. One of them was named Donnie Anderson, and it was a close game. I think they did miss a field goal or 2, but we kind of controlled the ball most of the time, and we didn't make any mistakes on offense, and so it was pretty. It was a little closer than 17-7, but it wasn't a whole lot closer.
I think it's 17-9 was the final, and then another interesting thing.
Yeah, I'm sorry, 17-9.
Another interesting thing about that game was you were playing one of Dodd's pupils and Jim Carlin.
Yeah.
And that must have been fun. I would say, you would think, it must have been thrilling for Jim Carlin. That must have been, fun. Dodd was still the athletic director. And I don't know if they're, because the bowl bids at the time, and they still technically, they contact each of the teams. But I'm guessing when Dodd saw the bowl matchup, he must have been somewhat excited, and same with Jim Carlin. But 17-9, and that ended your playing career with a 9-3 record, and Bud Carson's best year by far. You coached 7 years at the Division I level. Where
We finished, just one last point, we finished 13th in
they-
the country that senior year when it was all said and done. Go ahead.
a very good year. And you were a captain that year, too. I forgot to mention that. It was you and Rock Berdoni were the 2 captains.
That's correct.
That must have been a great honor. Do you have any fun stories about, before I move on afterward, do you have any fun stories about Dodd as the AD, other than the one you told me about, you saying, when you signed me, that must have been when you knew you had to retire. Any stories about him, what kind of guy he was?
Well, I will say this. The first game as a sophomore, we were in the dressing room and Coach Carson asked Coach Dodd to do the pregame talk. And so that's the first time we ever really got involved with him from a football standpoint. And to this day, I can't tell you anything that he said in that talk, but I knew we had just won the game. He was that kind of a motivator and communicator. And so it was, I wish I'd had the chance to play with him, but because when I was coaching down there, I did have a chance to get to know him, in a different light, and really appreciated doing so.
Where were your coaching stops? So it sounds like you say you were at Tech. You said you coached for 7 years. Was it all at Tech, and what were your roles?
3 years at Georgia Tech, 2 years at the University of Richmond. When Pepper came, I left to go to the University of Richmond, was offensive coordinator up there, and then Dick Beswick, who was on the staff at Tech, was kind of my mentor. I coached with him on the freshman team my first year coaching at Tech. I'd always told him I would go wherever he got a head job because I knew he would get one.
He went to Virginia, right?
Yeah, but he actually took the Marshall job right after the plane crash. And 3 days later just decided that was not the right decision, and so he withdrew. But he did take the Virginia job. Now, Virginia at that time, they had a bottom 10 rating, the worst 10 teams in America, and Virginia was number 1. We had a better team at Richmond than at Virginia, talent-wise. But I told him I would, go with him. And so I was offensive coordinator up there for 2 years, and then I got out of coaching. I had set a goal. I didn't want to be a 50-year-old assistant coach changing jobs all the time, and I'd seen that happen. And Bill Battle, who was at Tennessee, who later was collegiate sports licensing, I forget what the name of it was, made a buku amount of money. But Bill had been named the head coach at Tennessee at age 28. And I started off at Georgia Tech, which is highly unusual. So I said, I want to be a head coach at a major university in the South by the age of 31. I said, I'm going to coach 7 years, and after 7 years, if I think I'm on track, I'm going to stay in coaching. If not, I'm going to get out. And I was doing okay until I went to Virginia. And Virginia, we were awful those first 2 years. And I was awful. I did a poor job coaching, quite frankly.
Virginia was people don't realize just how miraculous of a turnaround George Welsh did for that program.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Now, when Coach Beswick was there, I think his 4th year there, they had a winning season, beat Georgia, actually. But Coach Welch was crazy. I will tell you my favorite story at Virginia. It was not a fun one, but I tell it every time I speak. But we were playing Texas the second game of the season, and we were, back then they were just starting to get bad teams to play big teams and pay them, a lot of money to do so. So everybody wanted to play Virginia. So we go out to play Texas. They won the national championship that year, and we played a key role in helping them do that. And they had 3 All-Americans. One of them was a guy named Earl Campbell. And every bit of this story is true. We go out in the first quarter. Earl Campbell was rushed for 128 yards and scored 4 touchdowns and had to leave the game with heat exhaustion and leg cramps. We ran him out of the game in the first quarter. At halftime, it's 42-0.
Oh my gosh!
And we're leaving at halftime, and Coach Beswick said, "What do you think we ought to tell them?" And I was kick people. So I was a non-offensive coordinator that day, and I said, "Coach, I'm not going to tell my guys anything." I said, "In fact, I'm not even going in the dressing room." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, think about this. This is the second game of the season. It's 42 or 48-0. We are the University of Virginia. We got bright kids, not good football players, but bright kids. They know what has happened, and they know what's going to happen." I said, "I'm not going to go in there the second game of the season and lose my credibility by saying all the things we can do different in the second half, because you and I both know the final score is going to be determined by how many points that team in the other dressing room wants to score." And he kind of laughed. He said, "You got a point?" So we didn't go in the dressing room. I don't know what the team was thinking. But finally, the referee comes and finds us all outside the dressing room and gives us the 5-minute warning to kickoff, which was an appropriate term for us. And so Coach Beswick goes in and gave the greatest halftime message I've ever heard. He's looking at his watch, and a big grin comes across his face. And he said, "Men, I'm sorry, we've already cashed their check. We all got to go back out." And we got beat 60-something to nothing at Texas's homecoming. Now, who has homecoming the second game of the season? Well, if you played Virginia, it was homecoming. We played in so many homecoming games, we should start bringing our own float. But 2 years after that, Virginia beat Georgia 31-0 at Georgia's homecoming.
Were you around for that, or was that after you had
No,
moved
that
on?
was after I left. That was 2 years after I left.
That must have been, for you, a Tech guy, and also a guy who had been at Virginia, that must have been a thrill to see. After coaching, what'd you do after coaching? It wasn't until the 90s where you started the Ideals Foundation. What was, the transition into career?
Started off in sales, and then I went to work for a family of a teammate of mine chief operating officer for them. We sold that to a division of a Fortune 500 company, and I ended up running the uniform division for them. And then we ended up selling that division, which was a big mistake because we were the cash cow of the business of the division. And I started a little small staffing business, didn't know what I was doing, quite frankly, and got asked by a friend to run his staffing business, and so I was president of that. And while I was doing in the corporate world with the Fortune 500 companies, when I started the Ideals Foundation, and then I went full time with it in 2009.
That's a great cause. It's a very Georgia Tech cause. You think of of course, Georgia Tech. You want to win games as a fan. I want Tech to be as good as possible, but one of the reasons I take so much pride in Georgia Tech is rarely, if ever, do you hear Tech athletes getting in trouble off the field. And when they do, they normally are disciplined very, I'd say harshly like it's a bad thing, but they're disciplined very adequately and very harshly. One of the thrills that I had almost a year ago was when I had Bill Curry, and he's a very similar guy in that he wants to develop men. In my opinion, he's probably the greatest person to ever be associated with Tech athletics in general. I'm not saying greatest player.
He's one of one. He's a very special person. He's a good friend. I will brag a minute. Really proud of one of the young men that went through our Ideals Leadership Program. Probably the first 10 years that we had it. We've had it for 30-something years now. But he's the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks that just won the Super Bowl. Mike McDonald is one of the graduates of our program. We're excited for him.
That's amazing. Another Tech connection. I don't know if you know him, but the Seahawks, Rabel. Steve Rabel, their play-by-play guy. And then how did you borrow anything? And you may have not, but it's just the concept of this, makes me think. Is there anything you took from the Total Person program that Homer Rice installed in the 80s?
Well, Homer and I talked about that quite a bit. I had the same philosophy he did, and when I started it at the high school level, I didn't want to do it at the college or the pro level. I wanted to do it at the high school level. I conferred with one of my former coaches at Tech that will remain nameless, who was an athletic director at a SEC school. And when I put the program together, I sent it to him to look at. I said, give me your thoughts. And he was very impressed and got back with me. Well, 2 years later, the NCAA came out with what they call their Life Champs program, which was a combination of Homer's program and my program. And that guy had been on the committee to help form that program. He never did tell me that he was going to take some of my material and integrate it in there. So it was kind of a bittersweet thing. I'm glad that they felt strong enough to use it, but I did feel a little bit used.
Yeah, that's a bittersweet moment, but ultimately, even though you didn't get credit, you did it. Him sending it over, you did get to sort of push it forward to the masses, and it's a very noble cause.
Yeah, well, we've done it now. We've expanded beyond just athletes. We do it for high school students as well. We do life skills training. The Georgia Department of Education asked us twice to develop some videos for their students, and so we do it for students as well. And then we have a variety of programs for male and female student athletes, live programs and video programs.
That's just fantastic. I mean, it's great that you're doing this. Back to more Georgia Tech related things. First, I want to ask you. I can't believe that I missed this. Although I don't think he was the main guy. He was for basketball. But he wasn't the main guy. I don't think when you were playing. But do you have any Al Serrato stories?
Do I? Al lived. I moved my junior year at Decatur out of the Decatur district into the Lakeside district near Tucker, and I paid tuition to go back and finish at Decatur. And the reason I did was twofold. Number one, the football coach was a Georgia Tech graduate, and I wanted his influence to help me get a scholarship. And number two, Lakeside was a brand new school, and they were just starting football, so I knew, they were going to struggle. But Al lived right down the street from us. So when I was at Tech, I got to know Al very well, and I listened to Al from about age 5 on to every Tech game that I didn't go to in person, football or basketball, and I could imitate Al perfectly. And in fact, my senior year, we're playing Duke. We played Duke in Durham, and we won, and we're coming back on the plane, and I was doing what Al called the fifth quarter, and he always gives the stats and whatever, and so I stood up in the plane, and I had the stat sheet, and I was imitating Al, and I'd done it several times, and I was imitating him, and I had all of his mannerisms and how he referred to the kid's hometown and how he integrated all the stuff in. And I realized that, man, I said, this time I must be doing a great job because the team was just really into it. And I turned around and Al was standing right behind me the whole time I was doing it. But he also would let me, when he would announce basketball games when I was down at Tech, he'd let me sit up in his back then, the announcer was actually in the rafters.
Yeah, up in the little catwalk. The catwalk
So,
around the beams, right? And when I interviewed Tommy Taylor, who played basketball around this, y'all shared a couple of years. He told a story of how Al would let him, because the Hawks played in there around the same time. And so he said the basketball players got to sneak into Al's box and watch Hawks games. Al, from what I've heard, is just a guy, and it's funny because he's like me. He was a sidewalk fan, but he's a guy who I've just heard just love Georgia Tech. And then
he was golden like. He was interesting though, Daniel. When he would announce a game, he didn't have anybody up there with him, and he would be very demonstrative. You had to give him space because when he was talking about a guy dribbling down the court or passing the ball, he's using his hands to demonstrate that. And so the first time I was up there, he hit me a couple times, so I had to kind of give him. But that's the way he announced. He was very energetic, and he was a Tech legend. A big time Tech legend, and it was a great loss when he passed away.
Well, he passed away, from what I've heard, and I would say it was at relatively his own terms. Of course, no one wants to die, but he retired. I think it was the early 90s. He stepped down from play-by-play and moved to pre- and post-game show, and then he retired full-time, and he retired the year that he passed away. And so wasn't anything premature, and what I'm sort of leaning into is after your playing days, he was moved. He always did basketball, but he was moved to full-time for football. And then Kim King comes in. And from what I have heard, and I have Kim King's book, and I knew my dad always told me about Kim King, and my grandfather went to Brown High School, and so I had heard of Kim King, but I never really knew until later how instrumental Kim was behind the scenes for really keeping the program afloat, especially in the late 70s and early 80s when there were actually discussions of de-emphasizing football or dropping it to D3 or dropping it entirely. And Kim King and I've heard stories. Do you have any stories about him?
Well, Kim was my big brother. My freshman year, they assigned a senior to a freshman, and we weren't close that time. But he was, I got to know him that way, and then I got to know him later on in business. But he was very successful, and he was lived and breathed Georgia Tech and everything he did. And there change in administration at the president's office, and Tech was struggling a little bit, and we were not in a conference, and at that time, and so there were some people from the administration that were wondering whether this is something we wanted to keep doing, and Kim and a lot of other Coach Dodd players got involved heavily in making sure that they stayed the course and did what had to be done to keep it afloat until they got back on good footing.
What do you think of the program now? Brent Key, I feel, it's funny how it came along because, whether you think Jeff Collins is a good guy or not, I think he's a fine human being, but his tenure was so disastrous, but it may have been a blessing in disguise because without Jeff Collins, Brent Key would have fallen into our lap, and I can't imagine a better person to lead Tech football today. I really cannot.
No, I think Brent is. I don't know Brent personally. I've met him once or twice, but I don't know him personally. But I think he's the perfect fit at the perfect time for Georgia Tech. He's a Tech guy first of all, which that doesn't mean you're going to be a great coach, but he believes in what Tech stands for. He's had great training with Coach Saban and
O'Leary.
Coach O'Leary. And he wants to develop the total person. He wants the kids to graduate, and he's old school coach, and he wants toughness, and he creates toughness, and the players buy into it, and they trust him, and it's been a good run. I'm not a fan of the environment that football or college sports has gone to by any stretch of the imagination. I don't agree with the no rules that they have to go by, that they get to go by now in terms of paying and transfers. I mean, if they want to pay them, that's fine. But to open that can of worms and not have any regulation on transferring and how much people could make and how they could make it, I think is criminal. And I don't know how you get the genie back in the bottle. But he is adjusted and done well with it.
Sometimes you can, and I agree with you entirely, at some point, and I think the NCAA is waiting because I think they're like, this is bad, but eventually Congress is going to have to get involved. I think the NCAA is playing the waiting game, and eventually some action or some form of action is going to have to be taken. But I think Brent has adjusted very well. And honestly, you can use the portal to your advantage. I mean, that's how we got Haynes King and Eric Rivers last year. And, of course, you want to get the best guys possible, but Brent has also looked for guys who fit the Tech mold perfectly. And so it's worked out for us. I was a little worried at first when, the can of worms opened, but I think, we're in a good spot. We're in a much better spot than we were 5 years ago. And so it's been fun to see us sort of get back on our feet. When you look back at your career, do you have any, what would you say is your favorite memory playing, or just around Georgia Tech? It can be as a player, it can be as a coach, or as a fan anyway.
It was the 1970 season and the 1970 Georgia game. Those were by far, like I said, the 6-0 game. Tech people remember that more than the rest of them, but to me, what a great game for me, and I got more credit than I should have. But the senior year and beating Georgia, we say our freshman group says we were the only team to beat Georgia 3 out of the 4 years because we counted the freshman game because there were 44,000 people in the stands, so we count that as a big time game. So we say we beat Georgia 3 out of the 4 years we were there. But that was my highlight down there as a player, and just following Georgia Tech all those years and sitting in the stands. My dad worked for a company right down the road on North Avenue, and so they always took customers to games. So I'd go down to his office, and then we would go to the games, and it was just a tradition that we did. And I did the same thing with my son.
That's fantastic, and for me, me and my dad was a graduate from Tech, and he played. You and him have something in common somehow, in that my dad is a '89 graduate, and one year there, because by the '80s JV, it was what was the freshman team is JV, and they moved it to one game a year, and it was just the Georgia game. And my dad had played O-lineman. My dad was a very small O-lineman, but he was a decent O-lineman in high school. He played at McEachern, and he was all-county. But remember, he's an O-lineman. He was and so then they're looking for players to fill out the rest of his JV team. My dad applies and walks on, and they put him at wide receiver. He's 5'7" maybe, and they put him at wide receiver. But he played in the game, and there's some photos of him in uniform and in action in the scrapbook, and I think they won that as well. And it was fun because my grandfather, who didn't go to college, but he grew up a Tech fan, sort of grew up the same, probably around your age. He passed away 10 years ago, but he's probably, around your age, and he grew up in the 40s and 50s, and just to watch his son play in one game at that stadium was the thrill of a lifetime.
You have to understand, until the 60s, Georgia Tech was the only game in town, and it was a tough ticket to get to. Georgia was Georgia, but they're not like Georgia now. And Tech was in Atlanta, with Bobby Dodd, and it was a tough ticket to get. It was the place to be on a Saturday afternoon.
Were you at I have to think. This popped in my mind here. It's kind of random, but were you at the '62 Bama game?
I was.
That must have been incredible, and particularly because the storylines surrounding it, and because of the year prior, the incident. Yep.
Well, I will tell you, I was at the game, but I was not inside the stadium. I couldn't. Some high school kids, friends of mine, we got down there, and the chemistry building was right behind the west stands, and we got into the chemistry big classroom and got up on the top row, and you could see in between the lower deck and the press box. So we got to see most of the game until unless it got out of our sight line, but we watched it from the chemistry building.
Hell, that must have been. That's an incredible story. Because this is before they. This behind the West Stands. This is before they double decked it. So you could see down there, and those must have been just some. I can only imagine what it's like growing up then. Of course, society had there's a lot of progress society has made since then. But growing up then as a Tech fan must have been just an incredible time because. One, you had the tail end of 8 in a row, which sadly has recently been tied, but and then you have 60s. There was success going there with Lothridge and Kim King, and that must have just been a blast.
Yeah, ironically, I saw Lothridge and Billy Martin play just about every home game they played, and last week I actually had lunch with Billy Martin's son, so. Thought that was kind of ironic. He and my son are friends.
Well, that's great. That's about all I have to ask you. Thank you so much for spending your time just to talk about your life. You've lived an amazing life, and you've just thanks for just telling all the stories, and thanks for supporting Georgia Tech, of course, and thank you, listeners, for listening. And I'm not going to spoil the beans, but I have plans on a big episode with another guest in the works. There will be announcements on that later, but I'm super excited for a big opportunity for me in this page that is coming up in the next couple of weeks. But until then, thank you for listening to another episode of the Steam Whistle, and thank you to today's guest, Mr. Jack Williams.